These are so new, these anachronisms that I'm reading to you now, the last of the Decembers, thus far anyway, from 2022, that it's a little strange. I've been reading such older poems consecutively each December, starting with the year 2004, I think, 2005. And this one is number 3,789 in Roman numerals, and it's also called A Few Things About Marie. I'll just leave it at that. It was posted Friday, December the 2nd of 2022. She loved Liberace and had a lazy but genuine sounding laugh that she'd use a lot, especially when she'd mention his name, for which her descriptives would fluctuate between several tried and true blips like tinkling the ivories to twinkle toes, but in the end it always appeared to me that she had a lifelong devotion to the pianist, and I could picture them as the best of friends. Also, although I don't think she ever met him, she took many excursions to Las Vegas in her later years, particularly with her sister, my great aunt Wilma. Marie's husband, my grandfather, my dad's dad, had worked most all of his life in Detroit at Uniroyal, a tire company, which had a TV advert that ran regularly through the 1970s that featured a woman and two men who'd proclaim at the top of the ad, "Hi, I'm Uni. I'm Roy. And I'm Al." When he retired from Uniroyal in the mid-1970s, she and he trekked back to Arkansas and built a house just outside the city in which I lived, which was in the very near vicinity of where the two had grown up, met, and married before moving to Detroit during the Depression-era migration, thanks to its thriving automobile industry, especially. My father, with whom she was pretty close in later years, claimed that by the time they arrived back in Arkansas, or at least before her first husband passed away, my grandfather, that they were millionaires, which seemed so wild to me. I mean, it's not a huge, it's a big number, but it doesn't mean as much as what it used to, I suppose. But anyway, which seemed so wild to me, given that she'd always been a stay-at-home mother of 4 at one point, and her husband, but a long-term employee of a retail tire company. But it made me happy that she and her sister would go on these excursions to Las Vegas and be downright giddy in preparation for these trips. She could also be fairly cold, which made sense considering the life she had been given. She seemed less than impressed with children, for example. Sure, she put forth an effort once I arrived, but I could tell, and I wasn't the first, there was another one in Detroit. That was her first grandson. My dad had 2 brothers. The 2 of them still alive. My dad's not. Sure, she put forth an effort once I arrived, but I could tell that her mind would inevitably turn to worrying about what me and or my little brothers and sister were going to destroy, or how we'd managed to mess up her routine, or the meticulous order of her home this time. So the days we'd spend there could be a bit of a drag after a while. I had a tendency toward boredom when not spending time in my own bedroom. Not that there was any privacy, since I grew up in a small home. There were 6 of us, and I shared a bedroom with my younger brothers. There was no real sense of "you are welcome here" warmth at my grandmother. She treated us mostly as adults, I heard her make occasional baby talk for her dogs or for humans who were yet infants. Nevertheless, in general, I always felt a certain eye-level, straight-up adult one-on-one talk whenever we'd exchange words. And there was always that laughter, lots of sitting on the lazy porch swing after long hours of picking ripe goodies from their very large garden, feeding the chickens. I don't recall ever being let into the chicken coop, however, a uniquely designed home for the dumb birds that had a rather elitist look compared with the scads of old and stinky chicken houses that were strewn all across the Arkansas countryside, whichever direction one might move from where I grew up. Home of Tyson, Old chicken coops were fairly ubiquitous when I was a kid, in that same way that cattle in barns were, and the crescendo of locusts that swelled loudest around dusk in the from midsummer to mid-autumn. At about the same time, the fireflies began to emerge from any of the surrounding thickets and visibly alight, or when the mosquitoes were likeliest to bite. There was even a small family of guinea hens that arrived one year. Well, initially there were just two, but the chicks would follow soon after, much to her pleasure, Marie's, and ours. Aristocrats compared with the chickens. They don't require a coop, but utilize the more glamorous one. Anyway, they did not have to be fed as the chickens did. In fact, they were foragers who generally kept the property clean of the multitude of more problematic invasive critters such as slugs, ticks, grasshoppers, horseflies, crickets, and mosquitoes, etc. It was Arkansas. The guineas were even known to chase away snakes, particularly when it came to protecting the more lower class chickens. And since I am speaking of class, Marie did love her long luxury car, which would be traded for a new one with regularity at the Ford dealership in Fort Smith, where her brother-in-law was the top automobile salesperson in town for several decades. Also, she truly loved tabloids, especially the National Enquirer, the Globe, and Sun, many issues of which would more often than not be found in knee-high stacks next to her private bedroom. I think she typically would end the night asleep next to her husband in their regular bedroom, but of the 3 bedrooms in what seemed their palatial home, just kids, our place was about a quarter the size of theirs. She had a bedroom she called hers, and no one else would dare into that one. Mostly, I think, it was just where she sewed and quilted. 2 things she would often do, and that were much more than just hobbies. Often, these would have Liberace or Cher or Burt Reynolds or Dolly Parton, and sometimes all 4 at once, plastered in the most non-glamorous angles on their cover pages. Otherwise, her home was always meticulously in order, well vacuumed, the fireplace roaring during the colder seasons. Her husband died of a heart attack after chopping wood one fall morning, and he had never spent one night in a hospital. He sat for a bit, uncharacteristically, on the arm of their long 1970s green living room couch one late morning after he arrived back home from his very regular ritual. Told her with a face that was a bit more strained than usual and red. She thought that he was hurting. She went to grab some aspirin. By the time she got back to the living room, he was gone, just like that. I've always thought that was a pretty awesome way to go. Switching gears again, it is definitely worth noting that she was the best magician of the kitchen that I've ever known. And how I could continue for chapters and chapters on that subject alone. And I have yet to but intimate about her earlier years. It's clear I could write about her in this way for at least a month and so easily. So how could I begin to tie this growing list all up in a bow and allow you all to carry on with your days or your nights without turning this into a long and annotated biography? Why not, but why? I suppose I have been a bit of a trickster. Once again, I've started a piece I thought might be easy, relevant, historical, an aid to memory, and a montage, only to come to realize by now that there's enough detail that I could go on and on about this mysterious matriarch named Marie, ad infinitum almost. In fact, a month of this would not even begin to scratch the surface of getting at her person, even though I feel as if I know so little about her. My paternal grandmother, that clearly cannot stop me from relaying what I believe that I do, and from furthermore expressing my curiosity and my hypothesis regarding those things I did not know, had no business knowing, really. But these mundane facts, as I recall them, turn out to be just as interesting, at least to me, to that stuff that I might further imagine her long history to be made up of. One thing is certain. I did not begin to exercise my curiosity nearly enough while she was still here with us. And my assumption that I was not really on her radar might be fictional fancy. So what I have now is a bit of a meandering few lines about a real person whose name was not really Marie, by the way. Just another tidbit before I close this particular chapter. It was not her first name, in any case, but her middle name, which she despised. Her middle name, that is. I mean, her first name. She despised her first name. I've got a lot of work. I got to go back and fix this one up because it's kind of a mess, and this happens sometimes, especially these days. Anyway, and I do that, by the way, in case anybody is ever wondering, and if you by chance read my blog, I mean, do people do that? I always wonder. It seems they do on a regular basis, and you'll suddenly realize that there's a lot of just messed up, indiscrepant, inconsistencies. I don't like to say grammatical errors because it's poetry, but inconsistencies and misspellings and just things that don't make sense. I apologize. But I do go back and I do fix them up little by little and over the years. Just so you know, I didn't used to spend a lot of time editing like that, but I now write poems that are so much longer. And this is already so long, so let me finish it up here for you. It was a middle, but just another tidbit before her name was not really Marie, by the way, just another tidbit before I close this particular chapter. It was not her first name in any case, but her middle name, which she despised, like two of the rest of my foremost immediate grandparents, who also were known familiarly by their middle names. Hardly a soul actually knew her first name, and whose fairly mild streak of hedonism and her desire for a world that was made to order for her ease and satisfaction, but only because she built that world herself, happened to be only a couple things of hers that I've taken with me about my more grandparently years. For today, I'll end here. But now that I know that the varied and relevant tidbits about her are plenty and vast, which I find to be one of the many perks of being a so-called writer, if and as time might kindly allow, I will come back to tell you some more about this 6-foot-tall woman named Marie, whose life now seems to me to deserve much more than simply a cursory glance. So yesterday, I mentioned a word we like to use, process, and today I'll end with another word we also like to use, which I once upon a time hated. Ironic, as you'll see in a very brief moment. And that word is project. This project, as it is, turns out to be filled with an assortment of subjects, another word which is just a word, if you will, as if I might and do, since I am here now calling them such. So, if you are of a mind to join me at some point down the road in doing so, let's look at Marie again, shall we? I know I will, and I do, in this particular month, so they're coming up. A couple more poems, actually. This is a very strange POV. It's like a very strange perspective. Because with the distance of time and her loss that seems, with such distance, more and more of something that was rather more gained or accrued than lost, this certainly seems to me to be more than a worthy and pleasurable venture, and as entertaining as it might be enlightening, even through what one might call the occasional tragedy. And if that does not hook you, well, you're simply not hooked. I hope to see you soon, nonetheless. In the end, always addressing you, audience, or whatever. I don't feel very good because that is one of the most necessarily it's one of the worstly written. I mean, as far as errors go, just errors, sheer errors. I've got so many errors in that piece, and I've already posted it. Now I do this again. I have to remind myself I do this daily. They don't have to be perfect, ever. This one certainly is not even a perfect poem. It's just kind of a weird amalgamation that I just started because it was written, by the way, on her birthday. Hazel Marie Rainey Cross. Thank you for listening to that. I'm going to be going back to that one very, very quickly and doing a lot of editing.